Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofrumento, and you know that we do this every once in a while on this show, and we are talking about money, but we're not just doing it with just anybody. We have got an incredible guest today to talk about money. I love this guy's energy, and I know that you're going to fall in love with him as well, because not only is he here to talk about money, but this is someone who creates absolutely brilliant content. I love the way he presents his content in such an easily digestible way. And not only is he a fellow entrepreneur, but he's a fellow podcaster. So let me introduce you to today's guest. His name is Peter Waitzman. Peter is a financial wellness expert and the creator of the Expedition Money employer-sponsored financial wellness program. He holds a degree in economics from Northwestern University and has a professional background in banking, financial planning, and investment management. Peter is also the author of several Amazon best-selling books on personal finance, financial independence, and entrepreneurship, and is passionate about helping others achieve financial happiness and lasting success. I'm telling you, not only are you going to fall in love with this guy's content, but I love his business. What he's done with Expedition Money is very cool, and his most recent book is called Rethink Money: Why Common Money Rules Are Holding You Back. We're in for a treat today, so I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Peter Waitzman. All right, Peter, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. I am super excited to be here. Been a big fan of yours for a long time. You seem like the kind of guy that never has a bad day. So I'm super excited to be here and share some of your energy. Just kind of leech some of that good energy off you, brother.
I so appreciate that, Peter. Well, I will say, having consumed your content, I feel the same way about you, and I'm sure your audience does as well, because let's face it, it's easy when we're passionate about the things that we get to do every day, and I'm so lit up by conversations like this. So take us beyond the bio, Peter. Who's Peter? How did you start doing all these cool things?
Yeah, so, one of the things that I did is kind of followed a very traditional career path out of college and went into personal finance and consulting and banking and all those things that you said, and ended up getting into financial wellness and building financial literacy and education programs for businesses. And I ended up kind of bouncing to a few different companies and building financial wellness programs for them. And so one of the things that I did all along the way was kind of keep track of the ideas that I wanted to do, things that I saw were working. Maybe we didn't have budget or time. When you're at certain companies, they kind of have a certain way of doing things and they have their own curbs and all those types of things. So I had this wish list of a program that I always wanted to build. And so after my third corporate building program, I decided I wanted to build one on my own. And I wanted to build the program that I really saw that I felt like there was a need and really wanted one that was kind of actionable and different and practical. And, I learned a lot along the way. This wasn't the first business I built or started, but I applied the lessons from previous businesses to this business. And from there, it started to take off and, we got to profitability and a lot sooner than I thought. And I've built a great team that does a lot of the content and all that stuff. So I've just been really, pleased and proud and learned a lot along the way, and a lot of the missteps that I took early in my career, kind of helped me get here. And so we're just, I'm just really excited about being able to get new content out there and maybe take a little different angle. You mentioned the Rethink Money book. One of the things that I try to do is kind of go off the beaten path a little bit too in terms of the content that you were talking about, because there's a lot of financial education out there. And so if you want to get educated on budgets and kind of the basics of life insurance or investing or whatever it might be, there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of competition and, there's a lot of influencers out there that talk about a lot of things. But I kind of wanted to talk about some of the things on the fringe. Obviously, I can talk about those core things too, but, some of the stuff that really applies to people. How do we really make a difference? This is the question I ask my team a lot and other people that are in this industry is, how do you really make people financially well? How do you really make them financially healthy and happy and, achieve the things that they want? Or are we just kind of regurgitating the same old lines, the same old personal finance, mantras that have been around forever? And, what are we doing different? And are we seeing that kind of difference resonate with people, create achievement, and create meaningful difference in their lives? So that's kind of what I always measure myself by. And the awards are nice, and kind of sales are nice, and all these other things. But we're really looking for, are we making an impact on people's lives, and are we doing it in the same way, or are we doing it a little bit differently?
Gosh, Peter, I love that overview. There are about 500 things that I want to get into with you, but because you explicitly stated that your mission is, of course, to help people succeed financially, and that's a freedom that every single entrepreneur, I'm convinced that we all share that in common. Freedom is so at the root of everything, and freedom is a lot easier when we're not struggling financially. So despite the fact that I want to go into your entrepreneurial journey, which we inevitably will do later in this conversation, listeners wouldn't be happy with me if I didn't ask you that big old broad question then of how the heck do we achieve that? And I love how many frameworks you've got. I love the content that you put together. So I'm just going to leave it at that super broad question for you, Peter. How do we start going about these things?
I think there's so many ways I could tackle that question. And one of the things that I think we have to admit with personal finance, especially with anything else, like getting healthy or whatever it might be, or finding happiness or finding career enlightenment or whatever it might be, different people have kind of different preferences, right? For me, when I first got into corporate, I wanted to climb the ladder and I wanted to be ambitious. And a buddy of mine didn't want to do any of that. He didn't want to manage people. He just wanted to do his job. And I couldn't understand that. And I realized that we're just different, right? Some people have different things that they want to accomplish, and they have different ways they want to, accomplish those things. And they have different ways that they want to have a work-life balance and, just live life. And personal finance is very much the same way. I think a lot of people come out and they think, hey, I'm going to help you be wealthy. Well, a lot of people don't need a lot of wealth. A lot of people just want to be happy, and go home to their family and know things are okay. Some people want to be wealthy. They want to leave a legacy. There's a million different ways, and they're always on this different spectrum. And that's one of the problems with personal finance is that we have a lot of these very general rules. A lot of programs are built on, hey, here is our program philosophy. Here are the 5 steps. Here is our course, or whatever it might be. And that can work maybe for 80% or 70% of the people, or they can get value out of it no matter where you are. But how do we really help and make the people that are on the fringes flourish? The people that are a little bit different, the people who, like people maybe watching this podcast that want to do something on their own, right? Maybe they want to have a career. Maybe they want to have a side hustle that provides them that entrepreneurial outlet, kind of the freedom to do what they want, the passion to express themselves in a place where they can make a difference. So those types of things. So that's really what I wanted to, build the core of my program on, true, tried and tested foundations of personal finance. But how do we talk about side hustles? How do we talk about the rise of cryptocurrencies? How do we talk about all of the things that I think matter to people? Finding cheap daycare, or finding value in the network that you have, and the role of family members, and exploiting opportunities that you have in the family to make money, or renting out rooms, or getting a vacation of your dreams, or whatever it might be. These are practical questions that a lot of people have. Not everyone, but I wanted to have a little bit of something for everyone. And depending on what path you're going down, really deep dive into that. I know real estate investing is really important to a lot of people. So how do you get into buying your first house? How do you understand, what you need to know about real estate to get into that? So there are different paths for different people in my program, and I want to create very robust paths and bring in those experts, bring in that useful information so that people can, kind of follow and chase their dreams no matter what they are, because I don't know what they are for everyone. I certainly wouldn't make a guess for most people, until they tell me. And I think even a lot of people evolve too. They change, depending on their life. And so that's the big challenging struggle that we have in this program, is how many threads do we chase? But that's why I really wanted to build the team that I have, a couple video editors, a couple content creators and researchers, so that we can continue to see where people's interests are. We look very closely at that data, and then we try to continue to create content there. One, that benefits the program. Obviously, we get the traffic and the eyeballs, and, if there's advertising revenue or sell books or courses or whatever it might be. But then when we put this program into place at a company or an organization, and we just implemented it at a nonprofit, so people that aren't maybe getting paid what they could out in the private world, how do we maximize their income, that they actually have actionable, practical help to get them to places? And so I hear this a lot, and we actually just did some stuff on raising credit scores, finding cheap vacation alternatives for that particular audience that doesn't necessarily have a lot of capital to work with, but a lot of the same desires that people that have incomes in the private sector want to do. So
Yeah, Peter, gosh, hearing you talk about these things, and you talk about there's so many different paths, and we're going to talk about your branding in the second part of our conversation today, because Expedition Money and your website, it's labeled the base camp, and it's so cool how you take people on that journey. But hearing you talk about all the different paths, and everybody does have their own unique goals. But what I really appreciate about your business, well, two things really, is first, I love that you have a process, because whatever path I want to go on, if I can go on a process, you call it climb. And I'd love for you to talk about climb as the 5-stage process. But before we get there, another way that I really want to tee you up, because I think that you're uniquely positioned here, is that I would argue that most of what holds entrepreneurs back in the beginning stages is not ideas, because ideas are abundant. It's not action, because we're all crazy entrepreneurs that will just work our butts off for literally nothing because it's something we believe in. But I would argue that most people don't make financially sound decisions to set them up for success. And really what forces us to stop doing our businesses is when we don't have money to keep on going. If you and I had $1 billion in the bank account, we could do any business that we want. It doesn't matter if we're profitable or anything. So we always say that term of cash is king, and obviously I'm teeing you up for climb here because cash is super important consideration. You talk about this from two perspectives that I think make you very valuable in this conversation. One of which is you obviously have the financial backing, but Peter, you're one of us. You're a fellow entrepreneur. So cross that bridge for us. Why does this stuff matter so much, and how's climb as that 5-step framework, which is obviously an acronym, how does that help us succeed personally and in our entrepreneurial journeys?
Right, man, there's so much to unpack there. I could just go off, but to be very succinct about what climb is the acronym that is basically the philosophy of the program. So as you mentioned, the C is for cash flow mastery. That is absolutely the foundation for everything. No matter how many motivational posters you put up, hey, it's going to be better tomorrow, or you never give up, or just do it, or all these other things. If you don't have the resources to do it, if you don't have the capital in most cases, or the manpower or the expertise or whatever, there's a lot of ingredients that you could be missing that you're not going to accomplish what you want to accomplish. So there's just the practical aspect of it. No matter how much you want to just get into the affirmations and stuff. I'm certainly into the mindset of making money and being an entrepreneur, but there are so many people that, think that having the business card or the website and, having a video, an embedded video on their website or something, that makes them a business. That doesn't make you a business. It doesn't necessarily mean you're helping anyone. It doesn't necessarily mean you have any reach or anything like that. So you've got to have that. You've got to have the exposure. You've got to be out there helping people. That's going to kind of organically grow. The rest of the pieces, LIMB, it stands for lock in progress. So we talk about the insurance and protecting yourselves and emergency funds. The I is for increasing net worth, how to pay down debt, how to, help your own personal net worth calculation. M is for maximizing net worth. So then we really get into the investment strategy. How do we make our money work for us, right? That's our employee for most people that needs to work better. And then B is for beyond financial independence, right? Once we've reached that, once we've reached the place where our assets can support our lifestyle or can provide us what we need, what do we do with it from there, right? There's a lot of people that are kind of talking about that expedition, that path, that journey to getting to financial independence, but what's beyond that? Like, what's the point of it? What do we want to do with that? And so we cover all of those things. And then from there, right, that foundation kind of stays pretty stable, kind of consistent. But from there, it can mean a lot of different things to people, from business building. And you talked about cash flow mastery. One of the things I talk about is I think almost everyone should have a side hustle, and even if it's not something necessarily that you do for money, a lot of people have hobbies, and some people can make money with hobbies. And I think we should fully embrace that. One of the things that, whether it's talking about my book, Rethink Money, or anything else, we just kind of get so caught up in kind of what our parents have done and maybe our neighbors are doing. And it's just very traditional to have a single job, right? And to have that job. And now we know that people switch careers 8 times in their career. And yet we aren't diversified usually in our income source. It's usually one person working, or maybe 2 people, but you're dependent on that income source. And that's very limiting, right? But if you have a side hustle, now you have 2. You've doubled the number of sources of income for yourself. It may not be equal to what you're earning, but what that does is that can give you some freedom money, some breathing room to experiment with businesses. One of the things that I don't want people to do is just kind of get into the mindset of, if you believe it, it'll happen. If you struggle long enough, things will happen. You'll be profitable, build a business, sell a business, whatever it might be, because that's just not necessarily the reality. We know that most restaurants go out of business. Most businesses fail in the first year. A lot of financial advisors, the industry I really started in, most of them wash out in the first year. So how do we do this in a way that's responsible so that we're not taking two steps back? And that's really something that I want people to think about, and not just kind of the affirmations and the motivational stuff about it, but practically, what do we need to do? Because if you come to me and you say, hey, I've got this idea, I want to act on it, or, I've got the motivation enough. All right, so how do we lay the foundation so that it's not a problem for you? In fact, Expedition Money is a good example of this. I actually started another business that became profitable, and I started Expedition Money by saying, hey, I'm going to take a portion of the profits from this business and I'm going to reinvest them in this other business. And so to me, I knew what the runway was going to be for this, and so I could actually give myself more time because I knew it was only going to be a portion of the profits from my other business. And so that way I could be principled about it, not necessarily cash strapped, and hire people if I needed to, and all that. And so just kind of focusing on what needed to be done, as opposed to always trying to figure out the logistics. I'm sure, for you and probably a lot of listeners, and I know for me, my first business, I didn't have money saved up. So a lot of that, I was kind of floating on a credit card or trying to do other things, or, scraping together money or skipping dinner or whatever it was. And that's just really not a good way to live. You can make things happen that way, but in a responsible way, I want people to balance the things that they need in life and figure out kind of a way to give them a path to achieving what they want in a way that's going to keep food on the table, keep your sanity, not burn you out.
Yeah, it's really cool hearing this backstory and the way that your framework has evolved, because it's both responsible, I'll throw that word out there, but it also feels to me like it gives you room to experiment. You talk about the side hustle, and it really takes me back to a piece of life advice that I got in my early 20s was everybody should have 3 hobbies. One that massages your mind, one that is good for your body, and one that's good for your bank account. And it's cool because when you have those buckets that you get to fill, it's a fun exploration process in order to find out what really resonates with you there and what lights you up. And of course that doesn't happen overnight, which leads me to ask you this question, Peter. I don't know how you're going to answer this and what direction you're going to go, but to me, I'm a big believer that anything we focus on for 90 days, for example, 90 days to me feels like a magical time period. Anything we focus on for 90 days, we can get results in, because through practice and through reps, like you and I, if we decided to start lifting weights, we could in 90 days start to see some results. Of course, it requires a level of patience, but how do we practice this money stuff? Because you are putting out incredible content. Your energy, I think, lights people up and wants them to be better. How do we actually practice it? What does that look like?
Yeah, Brian, I couldn't agree with you more. And I probably haven't thought about the time period as much. I would almost boil it down. It's actually a book that I'm working on, when I was trying to decode what made my first business successful, and, trying to figure out what those lessons were, because I didn't really do it with a lot of intention. I kind of backed into it, and in some ways it was accidental, and I was lucky about some of the other things, but I tried to decode what made that successful. And, I tried to then apply that to this business, and I think it worked again. Like I said, even when I was speaking with my wife about this particular business and starting it up, I said, it's probably going to be a cash loser for 3 years. But it took us about 7 months to get it to break even, and then from profitability from there. So, that was ahead of schedule. And, I kind of tried to apply the same rules. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work out the same way, and especially when there are different types of businesses. But to me, I think, to even boil it down to a simpler sense, is just pick something and do it. Like you said, get the reps. And if you don't like it, like you said, if it's not filling your soul, if it's not something that you like, I was thinking about this TV show I used to watch when it was on for one season, LA to Vegas, and she had this list of jogging and doing yoga in the park, and he's like, you don't like to do any of this stuff, but she's like, I want to do that stuff. I think a lot of people want to like money. They want to be financially responsible, just like we want to be healthy. We want to be active. We want to be cultured and funny and charismatic and all these things. Well, the reality is there are things that we want to do, right? And we know them in our heart. I like to watch TV or eat cheesecake or whatever it might be, right? But what are the things that kind of put that toe in the water for you in terms of personal finance that you like to do? And that might be going to Salvation Army and flipping stuff on eBay. That might be, just looking at your checkbook and or your bank account statement and figuring out what subscriptions you can cancel, whatever it might be, right? So, in some cases, what I liked doing for a while was just having one of those acrylic banks. And when I would get change, fill that out, because I knew when that acrylic bank, even though it wasn't that big, when it was full of random change, it was a couple $100. And so it just kind of felt good. It was just one of those things that really doesn't make necessarily a big difference in life, but it was one of those things where I kind of looked forward to change, and I was careful about not losing change when I was out, because I knew I could put it in that bank when I got home. And so figuring out what are the things that you like and do them, and then do them consistently. And then from there, you can start exploring what else do you like, right? So maybe it's not filling up that acrylic bank, but now it's seeing that value in that savings account, or it's seeing the value in your M1 investing account, or the number of shares that you're buying go up, or your dividend statement, or whatever it might be. Maybe real estate investing, you want that next property, and so you're saving towards it, or it's that vacation, instead of the $1,000 vacation, you want to take that dream $2,500 vacation. And so how close are you to getting there? So whatever it is, just start with something, and it doesn't have to be the things that you think people want to see, or that you think I want you to do, right? Because obviously we get into some advanced topics, but just some of the small, silly things. Sell something on eBay every week. Skip a dinner out every week, whatever it might be, whatever it is for you, just do that consistently. And then it becomes part of your lifestyle, becomes part of your habit, and you can build on that. And you would be surprised, just like compound interest, how much those small things that you do, and, kind of talking about the James Clear atomic habits here, that once you build on them, you're like, hey, like you said, 90 days later, oh my gosh, I can't believe the amount of stuff I did. And I'll tell you, actually, one of the things that I wanted to do at the very beginning of Expedition Money, this is before I had even registered a company, I didn't know the name of the company. I thought I wanted to have 300 pieces of content. And then I realized, instead of kind of benchmarking to that goal, we would just start producing content. I would let people decide, what's in the news, or what government changes are happening, or laws are changing, or financial rules, and we'll just start building stuff. And before I knew it, maybe 6 months later, I had 3,000 pieces of content. Just blew that number out of the water. And it wasn't because we're taking on big, hairy, audacious goals. It was just that, hey, we're doing something, and we can put out 22 pieces of content today, but we can only put out 3 pieces of content next week. So not really standing on like the kind of the corporateness of, hey, we've got to stick to these benchmarks and we're going to pace ourselves for this. Just doing what you want, what you're passionate about, creating the content that you feel is helpful, create the content that we see as being consumed, dive deeper into it, and before you know it, you've achieved massive stuff, and it doesn't even feel like it. So hopefully that answers the question a little bit.
Yeah, so well said, Peter. It's such a hard thing to do in life, is to trust the reps. And that's really what I'm hearing from your side here is just put the work in. The results, we can't always control the results, but I love the fact that you gamify it. And especially you're speaking to, I think it's something that all of us entrepreneurs have in common, is we love achievement. We love seeing goals being accomplished. And you talk about just set yourself that goal. Save up $2,500 for a vacation every week, even if you only could throw $20 in there in any given time period. It's cool to start to see that account grow. One of the things that has been the most transformative behind the scenes in my businesses is when I started a growth fund. And so 10% of every dollar that comes in top line revenue, I just take out of the business fund and keep it in the business in the form of a growth fund. And seeing the growth fund grow is so exciting for me. It makes me want to make more revenue in different ways. And it's so cool to see that happen. Peter, I knew that time would fly by with you, and I still want to squeeze in a couple things. The first of which is I'm so fascinated not only by the quality of content that you create and really how mission driven you are. It speaks through in all the content I've seen from you. Is what I'm really fascinated by is the way that you've structured your business. It's an employer sponsored solution. I think that that's so brilliant. One of the earliest economic lessons that I learned as a teenage entrepreneur was when someone told me, Brian, make sure you understand your customers and your consumers. And Peter, as a consumer of your content, I can say that it feels like you care about teaching us. You don't have those ulterior motives. Obviously, that comes a lot from the model that you've chosen as well as your personal traits. But talk to us about being that employer-sponsored solution. I think it's such a brilliant move in your space.
Yeah, I mean, that was intentional. I saw a lot of different wellness programs being offered in different ways. And, I like them all. And if you can make that happen, and I've seen some people be very successful in the direct to consumer world. My paths crossed very early with Ali Abdal when we were both building channels. And he's obviously going very direct to the consumer, has built a big business out of it. One of the things that I liked was going to a company, one company, and then getting a lot of lives, making an impact that way. The thing that I wanted to undo or unthink was that a lot of programs will then try to cater to what they think the employer or the company wants to offer their employees. The difference is, and hopefully we're doing this, and I think you kind of mentioned this, but if we create engaging, useful content that individuals want, hopefully they will be the driving force for us coming in, that they'll say, hey, I get some great free content from Expedition Money, from Pete, from his team, whatever it might be. I would love to get this course that they provide, how to complete the FAFSA form, how to buy your first house, how to buy your first investment property, how to invest in cryptocurrency responsibly, whatever it might be, right? How to cut the cord from cable. That's been a big one. How to start your first side hustle. So there are a ton of different topics, and then say, hey, I would love to have access to this, and then go to the employer and say, hey, is this something we could provide? Is this something that you could add to our suite of employee benefits so that we can have access to it? Because what I want to do is be able to be a no-brainer to the people using it, but also to the people that are paying it. Instead of just building a program that we think, hey, this is going to be sellable to an employer and it's really not that useful to people, you can make money that way. I guarantee you can make money that way. But that's not what I wanted. I really ultimately wanted to know that we were helping change lives in a small way, in a big way, across the spectrum of people, but whatever it was, kind of moving people through their life, through that climb process, making progress, getting them closer to peace, getting them closer to financial serenity, financial happiness, financial independence. And so ultimately what I think about is the end user. And then the method is going through the employers. And hopefully we create a program that's so good for the people that the employers say, hey, I don't know what you're doing, but I don't really need to know, but it's helping people and I want to be able to offer it to people.
Yeah, I love that approach. Peter, the other reason why I really like that is because I think about in my early 20s, when I just graduated college, if an employer offered this, well, did I need it back then? 1,000,000%. I think we all need it, especially the depth and the breadth of the topics that you cover. However, early 20s me wasn't in a position to invest in something like this. And so I think impacting people at scale, the way that you talked about it, and having the employers which care about the well-being of their employees, because ultimately that's what makes businesses succeed, I think it's absolutely brilliant. It's such a testament to how brilliant you are in business, Peter. So this final question, I'm very excited. And by the way, I'm going to tee up for listeners that if you're thinking to yourself, I want more Peter, well, that's perfect because he's got a YouTube channel, he's got his podcast, he's got books, he's got a lot of things. We're going to drop those links in just a few minutes. But before we get there, Peter, I'm so excited to hear your best advice with your entrepreneurial hat on for our listeners, knowing that we're being listened to by both wantrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different levels of their own personal and professional growth journeys. And as a fellow entrepreneur yourself, what's that one piece of advice that you want to leave them with today?
Oh, that's a great question, Brian. I'll go with this one. And again, I don't know that this is super unique, but it might be a little bit of a rethink for people, is that I think people should create lots of content, as much as you possibly can, because I think a lot of us intuit or have that intuition about what people want to hear, about what will be successful, about what will be resonate with people, about what will be picked up or shared or whatever it is. And for me, I was very much in that same boat. When I first started creating content, I was creating content that I thought people wanted to hear. In fact, I even thought I was being smart about it. I was out there looking and, hey, this content got a lot of views. I can create some content very similar to that. And then, all it is crickets. And you're kind of wondering, hey, my content was as good as that. Why isn't it doing as well? And so what I think you should do, and what's worked for me, is to create a lot and then also continue to watch that data. Continue to watch the other things too that are a little softer, like the comments. And, you don't necessarily need a lot of people, but if a few people are getting a lot of value out of something, maybe double down on that, chase that down the rabbit hole a little bit. And so create as much as you can. I hear a lot of people talking about, well, I want to give that some breathing room. Well, I don't want to flood my social media feed with too much stuff. I don't want to clog up YouTube or whatever. There's so many kind of weird rationales that I hear that people justify slowing themselves down, kind of in this day and age of like short attention spans and lots of competition and people leveling up at record paces and, AI helping people be more efficient than ever. I think you've got to get out there in the biggest way possible to help yourself get discovered. And then once you get discovered, and maybe it's one piece of content, one message, one philosophical idea, one thing that you've mastered, whatever it might be, then double down on that. If you're seeing something, run with it. I call it exploiting it, but not exploiting it in a bad way. Hey, people want to know more about that. Hey, if you know how to get vacations on the cheap, a lot of people have made reputations on buying things cheaply, getting great vacations, leveling up in their career, finding great jobs, how to be an expert on LinkedIn, whatever it might be. You might not think you're that expert at the beginning, but if you're seeing traction with something, just double down on it. Chase that down as far as you can go, because you never know where that might lead. And some of those things can grow at just unbelievable paces. So try a lot, throw it out there, experiment, watch the data, and then follow what's working.
Boom. That's a roadmap from you right there, just in that one answer, Peter. And you're right. I think it's advice that everybody needs to hear. It sounds counterintuitive on the surface level. What I'm hearing is quantity over quality, because the quality will start to come. And I think that is such an important message. And along those lines, I teased it as that there's a heck of a lot of content from Peter Waitzman out there. So Peter, I'm very excited for listeners to go deeper into all the incredible things that you're putting into the world. Your books, I will say, I have not read your books just yet, but reading the teasers of what's inside of them, it's very clear. Not only are you a brilliant marketer, but I really want to read what's inside those books. And obviously, you've got so many resources out there. So drop those links for listeners who want to find Expedition Money and all the great things that you're doing. Where should they go from here?
Yeah, check out the Expedition Money YouTube channel or on social media. Or if you want to check out the Expedition Money Financial Wellness Program, that is at www.expedition.money. So looking forward to having everyone there. I would love you to be part of the community. I want to thank you, Brian, for letting me be part of your expedition, and everyone else that wants to join me on mine as well.
Heck yes, I so appreciate that, Peter. And listeners, you already know the drill. We are making it as easy as possible for you to find those links down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. I see how many different podcasting platforms everyone's tuning in from, so it doesn't matter. Wherever it is that you're listening, you'll find the show notes down below, and you'll find direct links to Expedition Money, all the great things that Peter's got going on. So Peter, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. Thank you.